Lieutenant Colonel James Howard's P-51 Mustang sliced through the thin air at 25,000 feet above the German border when the third wingman's engine began trailing smoke. The radio crackled with the same message he'd heard twice already. "Mechanical failure, turning back. Sorry, sir." That left Howard completely alone over enemy territory, one fighter escorting 60 B-17 flying fortresses carrying 240 men into the most heavily defended airspace in Europe, January 11th, 1944. His entire escort had just evaporated. Then he saw them emerging from the clouds to the northeast. Black specks that multiplied as he watched. 8 German fighters, 12, 20, more appearing from the south. Howard counted quickly, his stomach sinking. 30 FW-190s and BF-109s forming up in perfect attack positions, an entire fighter wing about to tear through undefended bombers. Every tactical manual said the same thing in this situation. Break contact. One fighter cannot defend against those odds. Survive to fight another day. The mathematics were brutally simple, but the bombers were at the initial point. Bomb runs beginning, unable to turn back now. Breaking contact meant watching 240 men die in the next 10 minutes. German cannons would shred them. The German formation rolled into final attack positions, 3 minutes from firing range. Howard checked his fuel gauge, maybe 40 minutes of combat time remaining. His ammunition counter showed 1,880 rounds total, enough for perhaps 6 targets if he was lucky, not 30. And in that impossible moment, with every ounce of training screaming at him to escape, James Howard made a decision that would redefine what one pilot could accomplish. He pushed his throttle to the firewall and dove straight at the entire German fighter wing. By January 1944, American bomber crews over Germany were dying at rates that made survival seem like pure luck. Without fighter escort, crews had a 25% chance of completing 25 missions. 3 out of 4 men would be shot down before finishing their tour. The previous October, Schweinfurt had cost 60 B-17s in one day, 600 men dead or captured. The psychological toll was devastating. Everyone knew the statistics. The P-51 Mustang was supposed to solve that problem, capable of escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back. But the doctrine assumed multiple fighters working together. Nobody had written procedures for one pilot against 30. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about James Howard's impossible mission. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard this story before. And if you appreciate this level of historical detail, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. Howard wasn't a rookie pilot making a desperate gamble without understanding the odds. At 30 years old, he'd scored 6 confirmed kills flying with the American Volunteer Group in China. He understood energy tactics, altitude advantages, and how to exploit speed. He also understood that 30 German fighters could kill him in seconds if he made one mistake. His plan was brutally simple. Dive through their formation at maximum speed. Disrupt their attack, make them react to him instead of focusing on the bombers. Howard rolled inverted and dropped toward the German formation. The airspeed indicator climbed past 400 miles per hour as his Mustang screamed through 15,000 feet. His vision narrowed from the G-forces. The lead FW-190s were lining up on the B-17s when Howard opened fire. All 650 caliber machine guns erupted simultaneously, 2,000 rounds per minute combined. The tracers walked across an FW-190's fuselage, shredding the tail section. The German fighter rolled away trailing smoke and glycol. The formation scattered. Howard had bought maybe 30 seconds. The German pilots reformed with professional efficiency. Years of combat experience showing in their coordination. They split into 2 groups. Half went after the bombers, half came after Howard. This was the nightmare scenario Howard had known was coming. He couldn't defend the bombers and fight for his own survival simultaneously. Every second spent evading attacks was a second the bombers were vulnerable. Howard chose the bombers. He pulled into a climbing turn and dove back into the Germans, attacking from the front. Another burst. Another FW-190 breaking away with battle damage. Tracer streaked past his canopy, close enough that he could see the smoke trails. A BF-109 was on his tail, closing fast. Howard snap-rolled right, reversed hard left. The Messerschmitt overshot. He fired point-blank range into the cockpit. The BF-109's canopy shattered, but 15 more fighters were still coming, and his ammunition counter was dropping fast. 10 minutes into the fight, Howard realized something crucial about the German pilot's behavior. They were fixated on him, one P-51, causing chaos in their carefully planned attack. Instead of ignoring him and pressing their overwhelming numerical advantage against the bombers, they kept trying to kill him. Howard understood immediately what that meant. He wasn't trying to shoot down 30 fighters, an impossible task. He was trying to be so aggressive, so unpredictable, so dangerous that the Germans couldn't ignore him. Every time they reformed to attack the bombers, Howard dove into them, forcing them to react. Every time they engaged him directly, he used his speed advantage to escape and reposition. He was fighting for their attention, not for kills. The tactic was working better than he dared hope. German fighters were breaking off bomber attacks to chase him. Formation discipline was degrading as individual pilots got frustrated. One P-51 was disrupting an entire wing's operations through sheer audacity. The psychological effect was as important as the physical threat. They couldn't believe one pilot would keep attacking. 20 minutes into the fight, Howard's situation was deteriorating rapidly. His ammunition counter showed less than 800 rounds remaining, maybe 5 seconds of firing time total. His fuel gauge was dropping toward the critical zone where he'd barely make it back to base. And more German fighters kept arriving, drawn by the radio chatter about one crazy American attacking an entire wing. He counted 35 fighters now circling the bomber formation. The B-17s had dropped their bombs and were turning for home, but friendly airspace was 200 miles away through hostile territory. Howard could feel exhaustion setting in from the sustained high-G maneuvering. His vision was tunneling during hard turns as blood drained from his brain. Every muscle ached from fighting the controls at high speed. One mistake now and he was dead, and the bombers would be defenseless. He dove into another attacking formation, fired a burst that might have damaged something, pulled up hard through a hail of tracers again and again, attacking despite impossible odds. For 30 minutes, James Howard fought alone against an entire German fighter wing, and somehow, incredibly, the bombers were still flying, still heading for home, still in formation. He was keeping them alive. Howard's guns fell silent, the firing pins clicking on empty chambers. All 1,880 rounds expended, every bullet fired. German fighters still circled the bombers, looking for openings. Howard kept flying attack runs anyway. He dove toward the Germans with empty guns, pulling up at the last second, forcing them to react defensively. They didn't know he was out of ammunition. They only saw this insane American pilot who refused to stop attacking. The psychological effect was everything. German pilots started becoming hesitant, breaking off attacks early, maintaining defensive spacing. They'd been fighting one P-51 for 30 minutes, and couldn't understand why he was still there, still aggressive, still dangerous. Then Howard saw them in the distance, the most beautiful sight of his life. Fresh American fighters diving into the fight, P-47, Thunderbolts with full ammunition arriving from the escort relay point. The Germans saw them too and immediately broke contact, scattering into the clouds. The fight was over. Every B-17 was still flying. 240 men were going home. Howard landed back at base with warning lights covering his instrument panel and his engine coughing on fuel vapors. His Mustang rolled to a stop and the engine quit immediately, completely out of fuel. The crew chiefs found over a dozen bullet holes in his aircraft, one elevator control cable nearly severed. He'd fired every round of ammunition, fought for 37 minutes straight against 30-plus enemy fighters, and flown his aircraft to complete fuel exhaustion. The mission reports from the bomber crew started arriving within the hour. Every B-17 made it home without a single loss. The crews had all watched one P-51 take on an entire German fighter wing alone. Gun camera footage confirmed what seemed impossible. Enemy radio intercepts showed the German pilots' confusion and frustration. Howard had single-handedly defended 60 bombers against overwhelming odds. The reports reached 8th Air Force headquarters by evening. Commanders read them twice, certain there must be an error, but every source confirmed the same incredible story. 3 months later, General Henry Hap Arnold presented James Howard with the Medal of Honor in a ceremony that made national headlines. He was the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive America's highest military decoration. The citation read, "Conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty." Howard had scored at least 4 confirmed kills that day, probably 6, and damaged several more. But the kills weren't why he received the Medal of Honor. He got it for staying, for fighting impossible odds when doctrine said to retreat, for choosing 240 lives over his own survival. The mission became legendary in fighter pilot training programs. Instructors used it to teach initiative under pressure and decision-making when the manual provides no answers. The lesson wasn't attack 30 fighters alone, an obviously suicidal tactic under normal circumstances. The lesson was understanding when the impossible becomes the only option that matters. When protecting others outweighs protecting yourself. When doing what you're told means watching people die who you have the power to save. Howard survived the war and returned home, rarely speaking about the mission that made him famous. When asked, he'd downplay his actions with characteristic modesty. "I did what needed doing. Any pilot would have done the same." But not every pilot would have. Most would have followed doctrine, broken contact, and survived to fight another day. That's what training demanded, what common sense suggested, what every instinct screamed. Howard understood something deeper than tactics or survival. The 60 bombers he defended flew 53 more missions that year, their crews completing hundreds of combat hours, all because one pilot refused to abandon them when his wingmen failed. Modern fighter doctrine still studies Howard's mission, not for the tactics which were, obviously, desperate improvisation, but for the decision itself. The moment when training and doctrine and self-preservation all say, retreat, and you stay anyway because the alternative is worse. That's what the Medal of Honor recognizes, not the technical skill or the kill count. The choice to fight when fighting seems impossible, to protect others when protecting yourself would be easier. James Howard made that choice at 25,000 feet over Germany on January 11th, 1944. 240 men came home because of it, and the story of one pilot against 30 fighters became a lesson about courage that outlived everyone who fought in the war that created it.